The signal came in broken, and it came in screaming. I was sitting at my station on Kessler Outpost when the alert lit up every screen in the room at once. My name is Lucy Bennett, and until that moment, my job was simple. I listened to the stars. I translated static into words, words into warnings, and warnings into reports that mostly nobody read. That night, everything changed. The transmission was not from a human ship. It came from a concordant scout fleet, 3 vessels that belonged to an alliance of alien worlds far older than ours. Their language dropped in and out through the static, but I did not need a full translation to understand the tone. Fear does not need words. It has a sound of its own, and I heard it clearly, underneath all that broken signal. Then came something else. Not weapons fire, not an explosion, a long twisting note that sounded almost like metal being pulled apart from the inside, followed by silence, so complete that my equipment registered it as a malfunction. 3 ships had been transmitting a second ago. Now there was nothing. I pulled off my headset and looked at my supervisor, a steady man named Owen Hale who ran communications on the outpost. His face had gone pale. "Play it again," he said. I did. The room went quiet as we listened to a fleet die in real time, 3 times over, until Owen finally told me to stop. Word spread fast. Within the hour, senior officers filled the briefing room, along with 2 alien liaisons stationed with us as part of an early trade agreement between our world and the wider galactic community. Humanity was new to all of this. We had only met other intelligent species a few years earlier, and most of them still treated us the way an old and tired teacher treats an eager child. Polite, distant, not entirely convinced we belonged in the room. One of the liaisons, a tall alien named Sel Vantor, listened to the recording without much expression. When it ended, he folded his hands and spoke in careful, accented English. "This is not your concern," he said. "The scout fleet strayed beyond the marked boundary. There are regions of space, best left alone. This is known to us. It should not surprise anyone that they did not return." "Known to you how?" Owen asked. Sel Vantor did not answer directly. "Send no ships. There is nothing to save." I remember feeling something twist in my chest at those words. Not anger exactly, something colder. The idea that an entire fleet had vanished, and the response from an ancient, advanced civilization was simply to look away. Commander Hale left the room to speak with Fleet Command. I stayed behind, running the recording again on a private channel, listening for anything I might have missed. I was still listening when Owen returned an hour later, his expression unreadable. "We are sending a response ship," he said. "Prep your gear, Bennett. You are coming with us." I asked him why, when the alien delegation had all but ordered us to stay away. He almost smiled, though there was no real humor in it. "Because somebody screamed for help, and we heard it. That is reason enough. It always has been." I did not know yet how right and how dangerous those words would turn out to be. The cruiser assigned to the mission was called the Halcyon, a mid-sized vessel built for long-range response rather than combat, though it carried enough defense systems to handle most ordinary threats. I had never served on an active response mission before, only monitored them from safe distance. As we launched, I told myself this would be simple: locate survivors, recover data, return home with answers. The trip out took 4 days. I spent most of it going over the last transmissions again and again, trying to find some clue in the noise. Captain Daniel Ford, who led the mission, was not a man who tolerated guesswork. He wanted facts, and he wanted them before we arrived, not after. "Anything solid, Bennett?" he asked, the night before we reached the coordinates. "Not solid," I admitted. "But there's a pattern, in the last few seconds before the signal cut. A frequency I don't recognize. It repeats 3 times, evenly spaced, almost like a countdown." Ford studied the readout for a long moment. Or a call. I hadn't considered that. A call implied something intentional, something aware enough to reach out, or to summon, right before 3 ships and their crews disappeared without a trace. None of us slept well that night. We dropped out of transit near the coordinates the next morning, and I will never forget the first sight through the viewport. Wreckage stretched across the dark in slow, silent drift, pieces of hull tumbling end over end, catching starlight in broken flashes. 3 ships reduced to fragments, and not one of them showed the kind of damage a weapon leaves behind. I had studied combat damage patterns as part of my training. Weapons burn, cut, or shatter from the outside in. What I saw on those hulls was different. The metal was peeled outward, as if something inside had pushed its way free with tremendous, patient force. Nothing about it looked like an explosion. It looked deliberate. Captain Ford ordered a full sensor sweep before committing to a boarding party. Life signs came back faint, but present, clustered near the rear section of the largest wreck. Survivors. Somehow, despite everything, there were survivors. I volunteered for the boarding team before I had time to think better of it. Grace Ellery, our psych specialist, came with us, along with 4 Marines led by Ford himself. We suited up in silence, the kind of silence that comes when everyone is thinking the same thought and nobody wants to say it out loud first. The wreck was worse up close. The corridors were intact in places, untouched by fire or blast damage, which made the destruction elsewhere even harder to explain. My equipment picked up a low hum running through the hull, a frequency so faint it barely registered, yet it made my teeth ache in a way I could not describe to anyone who wasn't there. We found the survivors in a sealed compartment near engineering. 4 concordant crew members, alive, breathing, physically unharmed as far as we could tell, and utterly silent. They sat against the walls with their eyes open, staring at nothing, unresponsive to light, sound, or touch. Grace knelt beside the nearest one and tried every method she knew to reach him. Nothing worked. Then, without warning, one of them spoke, a single phrase, repeated twice, in a voice so hollow it barely sounded human, let alone alien. Grace asked our translator to run it, and the words that came back chilled the entire team. The hollow choir is singing. None of us understood what that meant. Not yet. But I would come to understand it far better than I ever wanted to, before this was over. We moved deeper into the wreck to search for the ship's data core, hoping it might explain what had happened in those final moments before the signal died. The compartments grew colder the further we went, though our instruments showed no reason for it. Grace stayed close to me, her usual calm noticeably thinner than it had been an hour before. "You feel that?" she asked quietly. I did. A pressure behind the eyes, a faint dragging sensation, as though something invisible was testing the edges of my thoughts, looking for a way in. I told myself it was stress, exhaustion, the strange hum in the walls playing tricks on my nerves. I wanted very badly to believe that. We found the data core intact, protected behind a reinforced bulkhead that had somehow survived the destruction around it. As one of the Marines worked to extract it, I noticed movement in the corridor behind us. Not a person, not exactly a shape at all, a distortion in the air, faint and shifting, like heat rising off hot ground, except the temperature around us had been dropping steadily since we boarded. I opened my mouth to say something, and the humming in the walls grew louder, resolving into a low, layered tone that felt less like sound and more like a pressure, settling directly into my skull. Grace grabbed my arm, her grip tight enough to hurt. "Do not look directly at it," she said, her voice shaking now. "Whatever it is, do not look." I looked anyway. I could not help it. What I saw was not a creature in any shape I recognized. It had no clear edges, no face, nothing my mind could hold on to as solid or real. It simply was, and it was aware, and somehow, impossibly, it was aware of me. The Marines raised their weapons on instinct, though none of them fired, because there was nothing solid to aim at. The hum grew into something closer to a chord, layered and endless, and one of the surviving concordant crew members behind us began to weep without a single sound leaving his throat. Captain Ford's voice cut through the comm channel, steady despite everything. "Bennett, Ellery, Fall back to the shuttle. Now. I did not want to move. Some part of me, small and cold, and not entirely my own, wanted to stay exactly where I was and listen to that hum a little longer. Grace pulled me backward, hard, breaking whatever hold the moment had on me, and we ran. Behind us, the shape did not chase. It simply waited, patient in a way that felt far more frightening than any pursuit could have been, as though it already knew we would come back, one way or another. We made it to the shuttle. The Concordant survivors were carried out behind us, still silent, still staring at nothing. As the airlock sealed shut and the shuttle pulled away from the wreck, I looked back through the viewport one last time. The hum was still there, faint now, fading into the wreckage like a song settling back into silence, waiting for its next audience. Grace sat beside me, pale and shaking, staring straight ahead. That thing, she said quietly, was not hunting us. Then what was it doing? She did not answer right away. When she finally did, her voice was barely above a whisper. Choosing. Back aboard the Halcyon, the data core sat on a table in the main lab, like something none of us wanted to touch. Captain Ford ordered it locked down until our engineers could build a proper isolation rig, worried that whatever had happened out there might not be limited to sound and shadow. I understood the caution. My hands were still shaking an hour after we docked. Grace Ellery spent that first night with the 4 rescued Concordant crew members, trying every technique she knew to bring them back to themselves. Nothing worked. They ate when food was placed in front of them. They breathed. Their hearts beat steady and strong. But whatever made them who they were seemed to have gone somewhere else entirely, leaving only the shell behind. I could not stop thinking about the phrase one of them had spoken. The hollow choir is singing. It stayed with me through every quiet moment, a splinter lodged somewhere behind my thoughts. The next morning, our engineers managed to extract a partial log from the data core, enough for our translator to piece together fragments of what the scout fleet had recorded before the end. I sat in on the review with Ford, Grace, and Sel Vantor, who had insisted on joining us despite his earlier warning to stay away. The recovered log showed the scout fleet had drifted slightly beyond the marked boundary while tracking an unusual gravitational anomaly. Their sensors picked up something faint at first, a low-frequency emission with no clear source. Then, over the course of several hours, crew members across all 3 ships began reporting the same symptoms: headaches, a sense of pressure behind the eyes, a creeping feeling of forgetting small, unimportant details which slowly grew into forgetting larger ones. One officer's final log entry was barely audible, his voice thin and distant. He said he could no longer remember his own name, though he still remembered that he once had one. Sel Vantor sat very still through the entire recording, his expression carefully controlled, though I noticed his hands had tightened on the edge of the table. "You knew this would happen," Ford said, once the recording ended. It was not a question. Sel Vantor was quiet for a long moment before answering. "There are stories, old ones, from before my people ever left our home system. We called it different names across different ages. The Hollow Choir is the oldest name and the one that survived the longest, because it frightened people enough to remember it clearly." "What is it?" I asked. "We do not know what it is," Sel Vantor said. "Only what it does. It does not attack in the way you understand attack. It does not wound the body. It reaches into what makes a person themselves, and it takes that away, slowly, gently, until nothing remains but an empty shape that continues breathing out of habit." Grace's voice was quiet when she spoke next. "Why does it do that?" Sel Vantor shook his head. "No one has ever asked it and lived to share the answer. We only know to avoid it. Entire fleets have vanished into regions where it is known to exist. My people mark those regions on every star chart we own, and we teach our children from a young age never to travel there, no matter what draws them close." "And yet you let a scout fleet go missing without warning them," Ford said, his voice tight with something close to anger. "They were warned," Sel Vantor said. "The boundary was marked clearly. They chose to cross it regardless, likely believing the old stories were nothing more than superstition. He looked down at his hands. I did not expect anyone to survive contact. I certainly did not expect your people to go looking. I thought about that word, superstition, and how easily it could describe every warning that had turned out to be true. Over the following 2 days, our medical team ran every scan available on the rescued crew, searching for something, anything, that might explain what had happened to them, or better yet, how to reverse it. The results were strange, in a way none of us expected. Physically, the 4 concordant crew members were completely healthy. Their brain activity showed patterns consistent with a person in a deep, dreamless sleep, except their eyes remained open, tracking nothing. Grace theorized that whatever the hollow choir did, it did not damage the mind in any way our instruments could measure. It simply removed the part of a person that made all those healthy, functioning neurons add up to someone. A person could be perfectly intact and still be entirely gone. I found that thought harder to shake than almost anything else I had encountered so far. On the 3rd day, sensors picked up a faint, familiar signature drifting closer to the wreckage field where the Halcyon remained stationed. The same low-frequency hum recorded in the scout fleet's final log. Captain Ford ordered the ship to full alert, and for the first time since I had joined this crew, I saw real fear cross faces that had, until then, remained calm through everything. I was at my station when the hum reached a level our external sensors could pick up directly, translated into sound through the bridge speakers at Ford's order. He wanted everyone to hear it, to understand exactly what we were dealing with, rather than relying on second-hand description. It did not sound like a threat. That was the strangest part. It sounded almost peaceful, a low, layered tone that shifted and folded over itself in patterns too complex to follow, yet somehow soothing in a way that made my chest ache with something close to longing. I found myself leaning toward the speaker, without meaning to, and it took a firm hand on my shoulder from Grace to pull me back. "That's exactly what it wants," she said quietly. "It wants you to want it closer." On the main view screen, a shape began forming out of the drifting debris field, the same faint distortion I had seen in the wreck, except larger now, spreading slowly across a wider stretch of space, as though it had grown simply from being noticed. Sel Vantor stood beside Ford, watching the screen with an expression I had not seen on him before, something close to grief. "It is closer than it has come to my people in 3 generations. He said quietly. "We should leave this place immediately." "Not without answers," Ford said. "There are no answers that justify staying," Sel Vantor said, his voice rising for the first time since I had met him. "You do not understand what you are facing. This is not a species you can negotiate with, or fight, or study safely from a distance. It has existed since before my people wrote our first histories, and it will exist long after every ship in this fleet is dust." Ford did not back down. "3 of your ships are gone. 4 of your people are alive but empty. I am not leaving until I understand enough to stop that from happening to anyone else." The hum grew louder, resolving slowly into something almost like a melody, and every screen on the bridge flickered at once, the same low frequency bleeding into our own instruments, despite every shield we had raised. I felt that same dragging pressure from before, pulling gently at the edges of my thoughts, and this time it did not stop at discomfort. It reached further, searching, patient, curious, in a way that made my skin crawl. Grace grabbed my hand, hard, grounding me before I even realized I had started to drift. "Stay with me, Lucy," she said, using my first name for the first time since we had met. "Whatever it is doing, do not let it in." I do not know how to describe what happened over the next several minutes, except to say that time stopped behaving the way it should. The hum filled every corner of my mind, and for one long, terrifying moment, I felt something vast and old turn its full attention toward our ship, examining it the way a person might examine an unfamiliar insect, deciding whether it was worth further study. Then, just as suddenly as it began, the hum receded, the shape on the view screen dissolving back into ordinary drifting debris, as though nothing had happened at all. Ford broke the silence first, his voice rough. Status report. Our engineer, pale but steady, confirmed that all systems remained intact. No damage, no breach, nothing physical to show for what had just happened, aside from the way every person on the bridge stood a little too still, breathing a little too carefully. Sel Vantor was the last to speak, and when he did, his voice had lost its earlier authority entirely. "It looked at us," he said. "It has never simply looked before. Every account I know ends the same way. It takes what it wants, immediately, without pause." "Then why didn't it?" I asked. He looked at me for a long moment, something unreadable behind his eyes. "I do not know, but I do not believe it has finished deciding." That night, none of us slept well. I lay awake in my quarters, replaying that pressure behind my thoughts, that patient, curious attention turned toward something none of us fully understood. I kept returning to the same question, over and over, unable to set it down. If the hollow choir had looked at an entire ship full of frightened, ordinary people and chosen not to take us all at once, what exactly was it waiting for? I would not have to wait long to find out. The answer came 2 days later, and it came for me. I had volunteered for a second boarding mission, this time to place recording equipment near the edge of the debris field, hoping to capture more data on the frequency without putting the whole ship at risk. Captain Ford was hesitant to approve it, given what had happened on the bridge, but our engineers argued that closer, controlled readings might be the only way to understand what we were truly facing. In the end, Ford agreed, on the condition that Grace and a small Marine escort accompany me, and that we maintain constant contact with the Halcyon throughout. The shuttle ride out felt longer than it should have. Grace sat across from me, quiet, watching me with the kind of careful attention that made it clear she was still worried about what had happened during the bridge encounter. I told her I felt fine. I mostly believed it. We reached the coordinates without incident and began setting up the recording equipment along the outer edge of the debris field, well clear of the largest wreckage. For a while, everything proceeded normally. The Marines kept watch. Grace monitored my vitals through a small sensor clipped to my suit. I focused on calibrating the equipment, grateful for something simple to occupy my hands. Then the temperature dropped. It happened fast, faster than before, the cold settling into the shuttle bay like something deliberate rather than environmental. My breath fogged in front of my visor despite the suit's internal heating, and the low hum began again, softer this time, almost gentle, curling around the edges of my thoughts like smoke finding its way into a room through a gap under a door. "Lucy," Grace said, her voice tight, "report your status." I opened my mouth to answer and found, for one terrifying moment, that I could not remember the words, not my name, not hers, just a strange, floating blankness where a simple sentence should have been. Then, as quickly as it came, it passed, and I answered her, my voice shaking. "I'm here. I'm okay." I was not okay. I knew it, even as I said it. The hum grew steadily louder, and this time I saw it clearly. The same shapeless distortion from before, closer now, drifting directly toward our shuttle with slow, unhurried purpose. The Marines raised their weapons, though we all understood by now how little good that would do against something with no solid form to strike. Grace grabbed my arm, pulling me back toward the shuttle's inner airlock, shouting orders to the Marines to fall back as well. I took one step, then another, and the world around me began to soften at the edges, colors bleeding together, sound stretching thin and distant, as though I were hearing everything through deep water. I want to describe what happened next as clearly as I can, because I have turned it over in my mind 1,000 times since, trying to understand exactly how I came back from it. The hum did not attack me the way I expected. It did not hurt. It simply asked, in a way that had no words but somehow made perfect sense, whether I was ready to set something down. Not my life, not my body, something quieter and heavier that I had carried for so long I had almost forgotten I was carrying it at all. It felt, for one long suspended moment, unbearably tempting. I saw fragments of my own life pass in front of me, disjointed and strange, the way a dream shows you pieces of memory without proper order. My mother's voice, calling me in for dinner when I was young, an argument with a close friend that I had never fully resolved, the quiet, aching loneliness of a long deployment far from everyone I loved. All of it surfaced at once, sharp and painful and undeniably mine, and the hum offered, gently, to take the weight of all of it away. I understood, in that moment, exactly what had happened to the 4 concordant crew members we had rescued. It did not take anything by force. It offered relief, and it waited, patient as stone, for a person to hand themselves over willingly. I think, if I had been anyone else, I might have said yes. But something in me resisted, stubborn and messy and entirely unwilling to be simplified into something clean and quiet. I thought of my mother's voice, imperfect and sometimes frustrating, and I did not want to lose the argument along with the warmth. I thought of my friend and the unresolved tension between us, and realized I did not want peace bought at the price of forgetting why the tension existed in the first place. I thought of every contradiction that made me who I was, every messy, unfinished piece of myself, and I understood, with sudden and startling clarity, that I did not want to be made whole by losing all of that. I wanted to keep the mess. It was mine. I said no, not with words, with everything else. The hum did not fade gently this time. It recoiled, sharp and sudden, like a hand pulled back from something unexpectedly hot, and the pressure behind my thoughts vanished so quickly that I stumbled forward, catching myself against the shuttle's inner wall, gasping as though I had been holding my breath for a very long time. Grace was beside me instantly, her hands steady, despite the fear plainly written across her face. "Lucy, Lucy, look at me. Are you here?" "I'm here," I said, and this time I meant it completely. The Marines pulled us both back through the airlock, sealing it behind us as the shuttle's engines came online, pulling away from the debris field at full speed. I looked back through the small viewport as we retreated, and for the briefest moment, I saw the shapeless distortion hovering exactly where we had been, motionless, as though genuinely startled by what had just happened. We returned to the Halcyon in silence. Grace insisted on a full medical evaluation the moment we docked, though every scan came back clean. Physically, I was entirely unharmed. Mentally, according to every test our medical team could run, I remained completely myself. Word of what had happened spread through the ship quickly. By the time I reached the debrief room, Captain Ford, Sel Vantor, and several senior officers were already waiting, along with Grace, who had clearly given them the basic outline before I arrived. Sel Vantor looked at me the way a person looks at something they cannot quite believe, even while looking directly at it. "You resisted it," he said quietly. "I said no," I told him, though the words felt inadequate for what had actually happened. "No one says no," Sel Vantor said. "In every recorded account across every species that has encountered it, no one has ever refused. It offers relief from suffering, and every mind that hears it accepts, because the offer feels like mercy in the moment it is made." "I almost accepted," I admitted. "I don't know if it was strength that stopped me. I think it might have just been stubbornness." Grace, standing near the back of the room, spoke up then, something thoughtful crossing her expression. "Maybe that's exactly the point. Every species we know of values a clear, unified sense of self, harmony, wholeness, peace with who you are." She looked at Sel Vantor as she said it, not unkindly. "Humans don't always have that. We carry contradictions. We hold on to grudges and unresolved arguments and messy, unfinished feelings, sometimes for years, sometimes forever. We are not always at peace with ourselves, and most of us never fully will be." "You believe that is a strength," Sel Vantor said, though it did not sound entirely like disagreement. "I think," Grace said slowly, "that something offering to erase a person by making them clean and whole and quiet might not know what to do with a mind that never wanted to be clean in the first place." The room fell quiet for a long moment, everyone turning the idea over in their own way. Captain Ford finally broke the silence. "Bennett, I need you to be honest with me. Do you think you could resist it again, if it came to that?" I did not answer right away, because I genuinely did not know. What I did know, with complete certainty, was that whatever had happened out there had changed something fundamental about how the rest of this mission would unfold. "I don't know if I could do it on purpose," I said finally, "but I know it's possible now. That has to count for something." Sel Vantor studied me for a long moment, and when he spoke again, his voice carried a weight I had not heard from him before. "In 3,000 years of recorded history, no being has ever refused the hollow choir and lived to describe the refusal," he said. "You have just done both." I did not feel brave in that moment. I felt shaken, exhausted, and deeply uncertain about what came next. But I understood, watching the careful, stunned expression on Sel Vantor's face, that something had shifted, not just for me, but for everyone aboard that ship, and possibly for every species that had ever feared this entity from a safe and careful distance. For the first time since the wreckage first appeared on our sensors, I let myself believe that maybe, just maybe, this was not a fight we were destined to lose. Grace found me later that evening in the observation deck, staring out at the stars without really seeing them. She sat beside me without a word for a while, letting the silence settle comfortably between us before finally speaking. "You know this isn't over," she said. "I know," I said. "It looked at the whole ship once already. Now it knows one of us can say no. I don't think that makes it less interested. I think it makes it more." Grace nodded slowly, her eyes fixed on the same distant stars I had been watching. "Then we had better figure out how the rest of us say no too, before it decides to ask again." I did not sleep much that night, but for the first time since this mission began, the fear sitting in my chest had company, something that felt, unmistakably, like resolve. 3 days after my encounter in the debris field, a new distress call reached the Halcyon, and this one changed everything. A second Concordant fleet, sent quietly to investigate the fate of the first, without informing us, had arrived at the edge of the same debris field 2 days earlier. They had not heeded their own warnings any better than the scout fleet before them. Their lead vessel had gone silent within hours of arrival, and the remaining ships had scattered into a wide, panicked retreat, leaving behind confirmed survivors trapped deep within the disabled hull of their flagship. Sel Vantor received the report first, and I watched the color drain from his face as he read it. "They are abandoning their own people," he said quietly, almost to himself. "Can you blame them?" Ford asked, though his tone made it clear he already knew the answer troubled him as much as it troubled Sel Vantor. "No," Sel Vantor admitted. "I understand it completely. And I am ashamed of how easily I understand it." The Concordant retreat fleet had already begun withdrawing from the sector entirely by the time we received full details, refusing all further contact and citing standing protocol regarding confirmed encounters with the entity our records now called the Hollow Choir. Their remaining survivors, trapped deep within a dead ship drifting closer to the heart of the debris field with every passing hour, had effectively been written off. Captain Ford called a full briefing within the hour. I stood near the back of the room alongside Grace, watching him lay out the situation with the same steady calm he had shown since the mission began, though I could hear the tension underneath it now. "They are leaving people behind," Ford said. "Alive people, because they believe there is nothing left to do for them." He paused, looking around the room at each of us in turn. "I do not believe that. Not after what happened to Lucy Bennett 3 days ago. We know now this thing can be resisted. I am not willing to let anyone die simply because resisting it has never been tried on purpose before." Sel Vantor stood near the front of the room, his posture rigid, clearly torn between decades of ingrained caution and something newer, harder to name. "You intend to attempt a rescue." "I intend to bring our people home," Ford said. "All of them, if we can manage it, yours included." The room fell silent for a long moment before Sel Vantor spoke again, his voice quieter than I had heard it before. "My people will call this reckless. They may call it foolish." "Maybe it is," Ford said, "but we did not come out here because it was safe. We came because someone called for help, and reinforcements are supposed to answer that call, even when the odds look impossible." Especially then. I felt something steady settle in my chest as he said it, the same stubborn resolve I had carried since my own encounter in the debris field, and looking around the room, I could see it reflected in nearly every face present. Grace was the one who first proposed the shape our rescue plan would take, drawing on everything we had learned about how the hollow choir seemed to operate. It did not attack directly. It offered relief from suffering, patiently, and it fed on despair, on surrender, on the quiet moment a mind decided the fight was no longer worth continuing. "If it feeds on that surrender," Grace said, addressing the room, "then maybe the answer is refusing to give it anything to feed on at all. Not through force, through noise, through everything it cannot quietly erase, because there is simply too much of it, too loud, too messy, too alive." Ford asked her to explain further, and Grace turned to me before continuing, as though drawing directly from what I had described after my own encounter. "When it reached for Lucy," Grace said, "it offered peace, and she refused because she held on to the mess of who she was instead. Every memory, every unresolved feeling, every contradiction. I think if we can recreate that on a larger scale, broadcast it outward the way the hollow choir broadcasts its own frequency, we might be able to drown out whatever it is doing long enough to reach the trapped survivors and bring them home." "Broadcast what, exactly?" one of the officers asked. "Everything human," Grace said simply. "Stories, songs, arguments, laughter, grief, all of it, all at once, on every frequency we can manage. Something so full of contradiction and life that it cannot be quietly folded into silence." It sounded strange, spoken aloud in a formal briefing room, and I saw a few uncertain glances pass between the officers present, but Captain Ford considered it seriously, and after a long moment, he nodded. "We do not have time to overthink this," he said. "We have people trapped and running out of time. If this is our best option, we use it." Over the following hours, the Halcyon's crew worked with an intensity I had not seen since the mission began. Every recorded piece of music aboard the ship, every personal message crew members were willing to share, every recording of laughter, argument, celebration, and quiet late-night conversation was gathered and compiled into a single, layered broadcast, designed to blanket the debris field the moment we arrived. I contributed a recording of my own, a message meant for my mother, one I had never actually sent, filled with things I had never quite found the courage to say directly to her. It felt strange, offering something so personal as a weapon, but by then I understood exactly why it mattered. The hollow choir thrived on clean, quiet surrender. We intended to give it nothing but noise. Grace assembled a similar collection from the concordant survivors still aboard our ship, working carefully to include Sel Vantor's own recorded reflections, given willingly once he understood what we intended. His voice, layered among ours, carried a kind of resolve I had not expected from him. The rescue plan itself was straightforward in structure, though dangerous in execution. Captain Ford would lead a small boarding team directly into the drifting concordant flagship to reach the trapped survivors, while the Halcyon broadcast our compiled signal across the debris field at full strength, aiming to hold the hollow choir's attention, or at the very least, disrupt its usual patient influence long enough for the rescue to succeed. I would remain aboard the Halcyon, managing the broadcast directly, adjusting it in real time based on whatever we observed. Grace would join the boarding team, given her experience helping the previous survivors, and Sel Vantor insisted on joining as well, despite Ford's initial reluctance. "They are my people," Sel Vantor said simply. "I will not let humans do alone what I was too afraid to attempt myself." We launched the mission 12 hours after the second distress call arrived, moving quickly before the drifting wreck carried its trapped survivors any deeper into the heart of the debris field. I sat at my station on the Halcyon, broadcast controls active, watching the shuttle carrying Ford, Grace, and Sel Vantor grow smaller against the dark as it approached the wreck. The moment we activated the broadcast, the debris field around us seemed to shift, the ever-present low hum faltering slightly, as though genuinely startled by the sudden flood of competing sound. I watched the readouts carefully, adjusting frequencies as the hum attempted to steady itself, layering our broadcast louder and messier in response, refusing to let it settle into any comfortable rhythm. Through the boarding team's comm channel, I heard the shuttle dock successfully with the wreck, followed by the sound of Ford's team moving carefully through the damaged corridors. Grace's voice came through steady, though I could hear the strain underneath it as she described the same falling temperature, the same low hum pressing at the edges of thought that I remembered all too well. "Stay with us, Lucy," she said quietly over the open channel. "Keep talking. Keep it loud." I did. I do not fully remember everything I said over the following 20 minutes, only that I filled the channel with anything and everything I could think of. Memories, half-formed thoughts, fragments of songs, anything that felt alive and messy and entirely unwilling to be quiet. Somewhere in the ship's databanks, similar broadcasts played on every frequency we could manage, layering over the hollow choir's patient hum with something it clearly had no simple way of digesting. Ford's team reached the trapped survivors roughly 18 minutes into the mission, 5 concordant crew members huddled together in a sealed compartment, terrified, but still, remarkably, still themselves. Grace's voice carried real relief as she confirmed it. "They're still here," she said, "scared, but here. Whatever we're doing, it's working." The retreat back through the wreck took longer than the approach, the boarding team moving carefully with 5 frightened survivors in tow, while the hum around them rose and fell unpredictably, as though genuinely confused by the sheer volume of contradictory human noise flooding the debris field. I kept the broadcast running, adjusting constantly, refusing to let it settle into anything the hollow choir might grow comfortable with. My mother's unsent message played somewhere in that layered noise, alongside laughter and grief, and every unresolved argument our crew had been willing to share, and somewhere in the middle of all of it, I felt, for the first time since this mission began, something close to hope. The shuttle undocked from the wreck 26 minutes after the mission began, carrying Ford's team and all 5 survivors safely aboard. I watched it grow larger on the view screen as it approached the Halcyon, and only once it docked successfully did I finally let myself breathe. Grace found me at my station shortly after, exhausted but steady, a small, tired smile on her face. "We did it," she said. "All 5, safe." "For now," I said, unable to fully shake the feeling that this was far from over. Sel Vantor arrived a few minutes later, his usual composure entirely gone, replaced by something raw and unguarded. "In 3,000 years," he said quietly, "no one has ever gone back for survivors once the hollow choir claimed a ship. No one has ever tried." "We did," I said simply. He looked at me for a long moment, something shifting behind his eyes. "Yes," he said, "you did." I did not know, standing there in the quiet aftermath of that rescue, that the hollow choir had not simply been disrupted by our noise. I did not yet understand that somewhere in that layered, chaotic broadcast it had heard something it had never truly encountered before, and that its patient attention, once turned toward a single mind, was now turned fully toward all of us at once. The real test was still ahead of us, and it would ask far more of every person aboard that ship than any of us yet realized. It came for us that night, and this time it did not come quietly. I woke to the sound of every alarm on the Halcyon triggering at once, a deep, resonant alert that meant full crew to stations, immediate threat detected. I dressed quickly and made my way to the bridge, my heart already pounding before I fully understood what had happened. Captain Ford stood at the center of the bridge, watching the main view screen with an expression I had not seen on him before. Not quite fear, something closer to grim recognition. "Report," he said, as I took my station. Our sensor officer's voice was tight with tension. The entity has expanded across nearly the entire debris field. Sir, it is no longer localized. It is surrounding the ship. I looked at the view screen and felt my breath catch. Where before we had seen a single shifting distortion drifting slowly through wreckage, now the darkness around the halcyon seemed to pulse with faint movement on every side, as though the debris field itself had become part of something larger, something aware, watching from every angle at once. The low hum returned, stronger than I had ever heard it, filling the bridge through speakers no one had activated, bleeding directly into every system aboard the ship. I felt the familiar pressure behind my eyes immediately, sharper this time, more insistent, and around me I saw other crew members flinch, hands rising instinctively to their temples. Sel Vantor arrived on the bridge moments later, his face pale, his voice unsteady in a way I had not heard since our first encounter with the wreckage. "It has never done this before," he said. "It has never surrounded an entire vessel. It has never announced itself so openly." "Why now?" Ford asked. Sel Vantor looked at me before answering, and something in his expression made my stomach tighten. "Because you gave it something new to consider, a mind that refused it once. A ship full of minds that refused to grieve quietly, that refused to abandon their own. I believe, Captain, that it wishes to understand why." The hum grew louder still, resolving slowly into something that felt less like sound and more like a question pressed directly against every mind aboard the ship. I could feel it reaching, patient and vast, testing the edges of every person present, searching for the same quiet surrender it had found so easily in every other encounter throughout its long, unknowable existence. Grace appeared at my side, her hand finding mine without hesitation. "We do this together," she said, "just like before, louder, Messier. Everything it cannot make sense of." I nodded, my hands already moving across my station, reactivating the broadcast we had used during the rescue, layering it wider this time, pulling in every recording our ship possessed, every voice willing to contribute in that moment, live and unscripted, filling the growing silence with everything alive and unresolved that we could offer. Captain Ford's voice joined the broadcast almost immediately, steady and clear, speaking without a script, describing simply what it meant to fight for people you had never met, simply because they asked for help and someone needed to answer. Sel Vantor's voice followed shortly after, hesitant at first, then growing steadier, sharing something private about his own history, his own doubts, his own quiet shame at generations of retreat finally giving way to something braver. Around the bridge, other crew members began speaking as well, some into open channels, some simply aloud to each other, sharing memories, arguments, apologies long overdue, laughter that came easier than any of us expected given the circumstances. The chaos of it all blended together into something the hollow choir's patient, layered hum seemed unable to settle against, faltering and shifting unpredictably as it tried and failed to find any single quiet moment to take hold of. I do not know how long the confrontation lasted. Time behaved strangely throughout, stretching and compressing in ways that made it difficult to track. At some point, the pressure behind my thoughts grew sharp enough that I nearly lost my grip on the console in front of me, and Grace's hand tightened around mine, steady and unwavering, refusing to let either of us drift. The hum reached its peak somewhere near what our logs would later mark as the 11th minute of direct confrontation, a deep, resonant chord that seemed to press against every surface of the ship at once, searching desperately for a single thread of surrender to pull loose. I felt it search me specifically, recognizing perhaps some echo of our first encounter, testing whether the resistance it found there had been an accident, a fluke, rather than something it needed to take seriously. I thought of my mother again, of the message I had finally sent her 2 days earlier, imperfect and overdue, and entirely, messily human. I thought of Grace's hand in mine, steady through every moment of fear since this mission began. I thought of Sel Vantor's quiet courage, finally overcoming generations of careful, practiced retreat. I thought of Captain Ford's insistence that reinforcements meant something, that answering a call for help was not optional simply because the odds looked impossible. I said no again. Not alone this time. I felt, somehow, every person aboard that ship saying it alongside me, each in their own way, refusing the same quiet, patient offer of relief that had claimed so many minds before ours. The hum broke. It did not fade slowly, the way it had during my first encounter. It shattered, all at once, the pressure behind my thoughts releasing so suddenly that I gasped aloud, my vision swimming for a long moment before steadying. Around the bridge, I saw similar reactions, crew members catching themselves against consoles and railings, breathing hard, disoriented, but unmistakably, completely themselves. On the main view screen, the pulsing darkness surrounding the ship began to withdraw, slowly at first, then faster, retreating back into the depths of the debris field until nothing remained but ordinary drifting wreckage, silent and still. For a long moment, no one on the bridge spoke at all. Captain Ford finally broke the silence, his voice rough but steady. Status report. Our systems officer, still catching her breath, confirmed what the readouts already suggested. No damage. No casualties. Every crew member accounted for, and according to every scan available, every single one of them remained entirely, completely, themselves. Sel Vantor sank slowly into the nearest chair, his composure entirely gone, replaced by something raw and disbelieving. It withdrew, he said quietly, almost to himself. In 3,000 years, it has never withdrawn from anything. Maybe it wasn't ready for us, Grace said, still holding my hand, though her grip had eased into something gentler now that the immediate danger had passed. I looked out at the quiet, drifting debris field, and I found myself thinking, strangely, that Grace's words were not quite right. It was not that the hollow choir had been unprepared for us. It was that it had, perhaps for the first time in its long, patient existence, encountered something it could not quietly digest into silence. Not because we were stronger, or braver, or more advanced than every species that had come before us, simply because we refused, collectively and imperfectly and loudly, to stop being exactly who we were. We remained in the sector for 2 more days, monitoring the debris field carefully, though the entity did not return in any form our sensors could detect. Sel Vantor sent a full report back to his own government, describing everything that had happened in careful, exhaustive detail. I do not know exactly how that report was received, though I heard, second-hand, that it caused significant debate among leaders who had spent generations treating the hollow choir as an unshakable, unquestionable law of the galaxy. Before we departed the sector, Sel Vantor asked to speak with me privately, finding me alone on the observation deck, watching the stars the way I often did when I needed to think clearly. I have spent my entire life believing certain things were simply true, he said, settling into the seat beside me. That some dangers exist only to be avoided, never questioned, that courage has limits, and wisdom means recognizing those limits clearly. He paused, looking out at the stars alongside me. I watched your people ignore every limit I believed in, and I watched it work. We didn't defeat it, I said carefully. I don't think anyone should pretend that's what happened out there. No, Sel Vantor agreed, but you made it hesitate. You made it retreat. In 3,000 years, no one has managed even that much. He turned to look at me directly. I underestimated your people badly, Lucy Bennett. I do not intend to make that mistake again. I did not have a response ready for that, so I simply nodded, grateful for the quiet honesty in his voice. We left the sector shortly after, carrying 5 rescued survivors, 4 still recovering slowly from their earlier ordeal, and a report that would eventually reshape how an entire alliance of alien worlds viewed humanity's place among them. I heard, months later, that the Concordant Assembly had formally requested closer cooperation with human fleets going forward, citing our unusual, unexpected effectiveness against threats their own careful protocols had never managed to overcome. I think about that mission often, even now. I think about the hum and the offer it made, and how close I came, in that first quiet moment, to accepting relief from every messy, unresolved piece of myself. I think about Grace's hand in mine, and Captain Ford's steady insistence that reinforcements meant something, and Sel Vantor's quiet courage finally overcoming generations of careful retreat. Mostly, I think about the simple, stubborn fact that saved every one of us out there, again and again, when nothing else seemed capable of doing so. Not strength, not superior technology, not careful strategy alone, just the simple, unshakable refusal to stop being exactly who we were, contradictions and all, even when something ancient and patient asked us, gently, to let it all go. They called for help out there among the stars, and reinforcements came, imperfect and loud and entirely unwilling to surrender, because that is simply what we do. It always has been, and I suspect it always will be.